All right, everyone. So today, when we look at the world of Twitter, or when we look at forums or videos online, we see a lot of videos, we see a lot of posts on how the Jews control the world, how the Jews are controlling America. And today I saw this meme that somebody posted up on Twitter, and it was a puppeteer looking like a Jew with long curly hair, and he has a hat with the Star of David on it, and he has a puppet that is bearing the American flag. And you see this type of thing all over the place now, and it's becoming more and more common, and I will say that it's going to continue to become common. It's going to grow in popularity. And this is really just a return to history. Several people have said that history is cyclical. It's cyclical. It goes around in circles. People return back to old ways of thinking. People go back to older ideologies. People return back to older belief systems, regardless of how destructive they are. You see people all of a sudden becoming nostalgic for eras that they never lived in, becoming nostalgic for ideologies that they have never lived under. You see people all of a sudden posting the Soviet flag on their Facebook accounts, and they call themselves communists or Stalinists or Maoists, and they've never lived under communism. They have never lived under communism. And you have people who are waxing poetic about the Nazis. I saw this post today. Somebody on Twitter, somebody posted this. It was this video from. It had some scenes from Saving Private Ryan, and it had this video of this old World War II veteran crying about the state of America. And this old World War II vet was saying that people will never live like I did after the war. People are never going to have fun like I did when I was younger. People are never going to have the opportunities that I had when I was younger. And this post was trying to say that I guess the Jews ruined America and destroyed the beautiful America of the past. And the clip, the video, would have the veteran talking, and then it would show clips from Saving Private Ryan from the D-Day scene. And the guy who posted it said something like, the white man will soon wake up to the dark realities of World War II and how white boys were sent to kill the righteous Germans. And I'm seeing more and more of this. I'm seeing more and more of this. And people just can't. For some reason, so many people have become incapable of understanding that history, to a great extent, repeats. Right? There is this saying, and everyone has heard this saying, right? Everyone has heard that history repeats itself, and that people who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Everyone has heard this saying. This is one of the most common sayings in the world. It's as common as an apple a day keeps the doctor away, and the early bird gets the worm. Very, very common saying. And for some reason, people are incapable of seeing it. People are incapable of seeing that history repeats itself. History repeats itself. And the way that older ideologies became popular are basically the same ways that they're becoming popular today. For example, the ideology that was very popular in the French Revolution, the ideology that really was holding the spirit of the French Revolution, which was the ideology of killing the rich and establishing absolute equality, which was what the Enlightenment philosophy was pushing for. It was pushing for this idea of absolute extreme equality. And the people who were doing the French Revolution, the people who were doing the killings, and the people who were bringing about all of the destruction, they had this fantasy in their heads that they were going to bring about a utopia of utter and absolute equality. And what do you see taking place today? You are seeing this rage fomenting against the rich. And you're seeing this sentiment reflected in the films. And the film that best represents this, from my observation, is the Joker movie starring Joaquin Phoenix. That film became weirdly and bizarrely popular. It became way too popular, to the point where I am disturbed about its popularity. Why is this film so popular? I only saw the film once, and I saw the film because I did enjoy the Christopher Nolan Batman films, and I know that Joaquin Phoenix's Joker was not directed by Nolan, but I am a fan of Batman. I do like the Batman film that had Jack Nicholson as Joker. I think that's one of the best Batman films. And then, of course, you had the other Batman film that had Joker that was directed by Nolan, and then you had the Batman movie that had Bane in it, and that was really good. So they made this Batman, or they made this Joker film. It's part of the Batman universe, and it has Joaquin Phoenix playing the Joker. And this Joker guy, he kills some stockbroker guys, and I mean the stockbroker guys are assholes, but the fact is that the film made the guys getting killed to be stockbrokers, right? Why? Because it was trying to foment this idea of hatred against the rich. The stockbrokers are evil, the rich are evil, and Joker is this unappreciated, misunderstood, isolated, disenfranchised, and ignored human being. And a lot of people, especially men, watch that movie and they think that's totally me, and they see themselves in that character. And eventually Joker, he starts this revolution against the rich. And eventually some guy with a Joker mask goes and he shoots Bruce Wayne's parents, because Bruce Wayne's father was super rich. He was the richest guy in Gotham City. So you're seeing this way of thinking, and this goes along with this angst of the working man. You know, I hate my landlord, I hate my boss, I hate my mom. And interestingly enough, well, bizarrely enough, I should say, Joaquin Phoenix's Joker murders his own mother in the movie. So I'm thinking, why is this a good movie? I mean, this guy murders his own mother, he starts a revolution, he's basically a fictional version of Robespierre from the French Revolution. And you look at people watching this film, and you have right-wing people who are taking Joaquin Phoenix's Joker and putting him as a meme against the liberal establishment. And so you're seeing this thing, this monster, this, how should I say it, this Leviathan growing. And what this Leviathan is pretty much a return to the past. Because, as many people have pointed out, humans work in cycles. What happens is that we adopt destructive ideologies because we're angry with something. So we adopt ideologies like communism or Nazism. And then we destroy the world. That's what we do. Humans destroy the world because they want to establish some kind of utopia that can never exist. They have this utopian vision for the world. They adopt a utopian ideology, then they destroy the world. They start revolutions, they do massacres, they do genocides, they orchestrate horrendous and atrocious crimes, and then they eventually go to war. They go to war. So you saw this with the French Revolution. In the French Revolution, it starts out with this ideology coming from the Enlightenment that the world could overthrow all monarchies, that the world could overthrow all religion, that the world could overthrow all churches, all religious institutions, all religious establishments, and could thereby establish a great and perfect world, a world with complete equality. And Rousseau, one of the main philosophers of the Enlightenment, who would later on be a huge influence for the French Revolution, he had this idea of complete democracy, where everything done in society would be done by a vote. So it was this. It went along this whole paradigm of extreme equality. So you had this ideology, and they thought, well, how do we create this perfect utopia? Well, we just kill a bunch of people. We kill the people who we believe are the obstacles to our utopian vision, and that's what they did. They killed millions of people. People talk about the French Revolution, and they'll say, well, hundreds of thousands were killed. But if you read Joseph de Maistre's books on the French Revolution, you will see that Joseph de Maistre wrote that actually millions of people were killed in France because of the French Revolution. And eventually what happened was the rise of France as an empire. Why? Well, because Spain and Britain and Austria, they looked at what was happening in France and they said, if we don't put an end to this fire, this conflagration of revolution is going to spread to our countries. And Spain and Austria and Britain, these were countries that were under monarchism. They were monarchies. So they were petrified at the idea of revolutionary ideology coming to their countries and destroying their monarchies, understandably so. And this ideology was spreading. It spread to southern Italy, and there was a horrendous civil war that lasted for a very long time in Italy, because you had people who wanted to emulate the French in Italy, southern Italy to be specific. Eventually the Vatican got involved. The Vatican sent some cardinal who had some knowledge of guerrilla warfare, and he went to southern Italy and he helped train the rebels. It's very, very fascinating history. You can read up on this. The Southern Italian Civil War. I think the highest concentration of fighting was in Naples, if I'm not mistaken. So eventually what happened was Napoleon takes over France because he said, well, all these countries have declared war on me, declared war on France, so I'm going to lead the French to victory, and he ends up conquering, becoming expansionist, and France became expansionist. You had the Napoleonic Wars, which was kind of like a world war to a certain extent, I think, and millions of people died in the Napoleonic Wars. So that was an example of what I'm talking about. You had a utopian, fantastical ideology that had a utopian vision. People tried to implement that utopia by killing a lot of people who they deemed to be hindrances to their aspiration, and then you had a war, and the world was torn apart by a war, the Napoleonic Wars, and it lasted for a very long time. And of course, we've all heard of World War II. You had the Nazis who wanted to establish a utopia where the Aryan race would dominate the world, and the people who were corrupting the gene pool, the Jews, the Gypsies, the blacks, and whoever was not Aryan, they would be exterminated, and the gene pool would be purified, and the Nazis would advance themselves into the next step of human evolution, and eventually they would become Übermensch, and they would slaughter the Untermenschen, the undermen, the inferior ones. And eventually you had a war, World War, the most devastating war in human history. And, well, we look back and we say, okay, let's not do that again. Let's not do that again. And there are other examples that I can think of. You know, you have the Mongolian Empire, where Genghis Khan believed that he was destined by the god Tengri, the god of the great blue sky, to dominate the world, and so he dominated much of the world and literally butchered 11% of the world's population, slaughtering tens of millions of people because they were considered to be hindrances to the Mongolian fantasy of a universal Mongolian empire led by the divinely appointed Khan. And there you had it, right? You had a fantasy, you had millions of people being killed. So we can fast forward to World War II, we can see the destruction that those ideologies, these particular ideologies, Nazism, communism, brought. And we can look back, and the world did look back after World War II, right after World War II, and say, let's not do this again. And that's why eugenics was shut down. Before World War II, the idea of eugenics, the idea of Darwinism, was very common. It was commonly taught in high schools. Things like Malthusianism and Darwinism, eugenics, the ideology of Francis Galton, these things actually were pretty mainstream. And the world saw the end result of this way of thinking in Europe in the Second World War. So the Americans went back and they said, let's not do this. Let's not repeat this mistake again. And they purged the textbooks of eugenic ideas. What's been going on within this past decade and right now? What's going on is a revival in this way of thinking. It's a revival in this ideology. Well, what's wrong with eugenics? What's wrong with trying to have a genetically healthier society? And these are the types of rhetorical questions that we see a lot of online. And another thing that's been going on is the rise of Jew hatred. We have been seeing the rise of anti-Semitism, the rise of hatred against the Jews. And a lot of this has been masqueraded behind a hatred towards George Soros. Now, I don't like George Soros. I'm not a fan of George Soros. I think George Soros is very evil. I think his son is very evil. But you do have people who point to George Soros or they point to Jeffrey Epstein, or they point to whoever. They point to this underground Jewish tunnel story. They point to these figures and they point to particular stories as evidence that the Jews are just running the world and they're evil, and they like to bring back old Nazi memes. The Nazis were into memes. In fact, I've been reading this book. It's called The Third Reich by Michael Burleigh. Very fascinating book, very informative, and he talks about the rise of the Third Reich. That's what this book is about. It's the rise of the Third Reich. He doesn't talk about World War II. He doesn't talk about battle tactics or Normandy Beach or Operation Market Garden. He talks about the Third Reich, how the Nazis took power. And that, to me, is more important than reading about any battle. It's more important than reading about Normandy Beach or battle tactics, because the cause of all the destruction of these battles, the cause of all the destruction of this war, the cause of the destruction of Nazism goes back to the rise of Hitler and the rise of the Nazis. People like to point to one guy, Hitler, and they'll say, that's the guy that did it. But it all began with a thought. It all began with ideology. And that's why it's so important to understand why and how certain ideologies become popular. And what the Nazis did was they pointed to particular stories, just like people today do when they point to George Soros or Epstein or whoever to justify hatred against the Jews. And I mentioned memes a little bit ago, just a moment ago, but I kind of delved off a little bit into another line of sentences. But just to go back to that thought, memes, the Nazis were really good at them. The Nazis were excellent at memes, and they were very good at aesthetics, and they were very good at marketing. They beat the liberals when it came to marketing, and that's why they called themselves socialist, because they understood that the zeitgeist of that day was popularity for nationalism and Marxism. Marxism was growing in popularity, and so was nationalism. And so you had the liberals who were all about, well, let's bring socialism, let's have some socialist policies, etc., etc. You had communists who were extreme socialist, atheist socialist, and then you had nationalists, and nationalists tended to be conservative, and you also had liberal nationalists as well. And then you had the Nazis. And what the Nazis did was they took nationalism and they took Marxism and they merged them together. And they promoted themselves as a synthesis between socialism and nationalism. And that's why they call themselves National Socialists. It was a merging together. It was an allighting of nationalism with socialism. Now, people argue that they weren't real socialists. Whatever. Regardless of that, the fact is that they called themselves socialists because they understood that socialism was popular and that it was a trend. It was a very high rising trend, and they capitalized on that. And the Nazis themselves admitted that they would synthesize these ideologies together because they knew that they were popular. So they were very good at this. And one of the propaganda posters that you can see online is an octopus with its tentacles all over the world, and on the octopus is the Star of David. It's the Star of David, basically saying that, quite obviously, that the octopus is the Jew, and the Jew has his tentacles all over the world. And you see people posting memes like this all over Twitter. All over Twitter. Now, you could make the argument and say, well, it's just a bunch of fringe lunatics online. You can say that long enough. There comes a point where what is widespread online will eventually be seen in reality. What is widespread online as memes will eventually incarnate itself in reality. It'll manifest itself in reality, and it manifests itself in politics. It manifests itself in human action on the street. And so we see this way of thinking becoming more and more popular. And we saw this after the October the 7th massacre of last year. We saw this. The world saw it. And I've said this a million times, and I'll keep saying it. Jews were massacred, and a lot of people decided to side with the murderers. It's pretty disturbing. But what does this tell us? It tells us that history is going to repeat itself. And for some reason, people have difficulty comprehending that history repeats itself. People have difficulty comprehending, regardless of the fact that they've heard the saying so many times that history is doomed to repeat for those who don't learn from it. Regardless of the fact that so many people have heard this saying, they cannot absorb it. They are unable to see that history repeats itself. And why is this, right? Let me explain myself further on this. Let me elaborate more on this. So people believe that history repeats itself. They just don't believe that they are on the wrong side of history. So they believe that history repeats itself, but they will point the finger at the other side and say they are repeating the evils of history. We are not. We are on the good side of history. And it's very strange to me. I was going to say silly, but silly is an understatement. It's very strange and bizarre because they will then promote beliefs that are very similar, if not the same, as the very ideology that the Nazis promoted. And they are. I want to be a little bit charitable and say that they have deceived themselves, but I just want to say that they're just evil, because how can you not see something that's so obvious? For example, you have many people who support the AfD in Germany, and you look at the AfD and you say, no, there's a bunch of Nazis in that party. There's a bunch of Nazis in that party. And you have people supporting it, and they're saying, well, no, we're not Nazis. Well, how could you be so oblivious? When you have Bjorn Höcke, who actually partook in a neo-Nazi demonstration years ago, and now he's leading the AfD, and you have Bjorn Höcke, who says that he basically said enough of these Holocaust memorials. The German people are the only people who will build a memorial of shame. We need to start being proud of our history. And also the same Höcke, who has expressed social Darwinist ideology. And then you had literally a member of the AfD stating how much he misses Adolf Hitler. I mean, when you see all of this, and you had one AfD leader who was dancing on a Holocaust memorial. I mean, when you look at all these facts, it's quite obvious what we're dealing with here. A German nationalist party that is nostalgic about the Nazi past. And they are becoming extremely popular. Why? Because, and I've said this before, I've said this a million times, because they point to facts. They point to facts. And the Nazis did the same thing. The Nazis did exactly the same thing. They pointed to facts, everybody. We have to recognize this. We have to recognize that genocide is always justified with facts. It's always justified by facts. And the people who orchestrate the genocide reference facts to justify their actions. We have to understand this, because by understanding this, we anticipate this strategy. And people will understand that genocides are justified by facts, that people who orchestrate them point to facts, and they can see, okay, I know what they're doing. Instead, we have a bunch of people who are presenting facts, lying as if that's all they care about is the facts, lying about the fact that they have ulterior motives, and then we sit here and act as if those motivations, those evil motivations, don't exist. Or that if you point to those evil motivations, you are a conspiracy theorist. Genocide is justified by facts. And I'm tired of pretending as if it's not. I mean, I'm tired of pretending as if that's not the case. It is the case. So the Nazis, they pointed to facts. And I've talked about this before, and I'm going to continue to talk about this because this is such an important issue. Because by understanding that genocide is justified by the facts, then we can prevent genocide. Because then we can see that that is what the orchestrators of genocide do. That's what they do. They point to facts, and then we can anticipate the strategy and understand that. And it's so important for people to understand this. So the Nazis pointed, the Nazis in the 1930s, they pointed to several scandals in which you had criminals doing terrible things who were Jews. And they pointed to this to justify their existence, to justify their ideology. So here is a scandal that not a lot of people talk about. And not a lot of people talk about this. Not a lot of people talk about this. And there's not a lot of information on the internet about this. But I was reading about this in this book, On the Rise of the Third Reich. And there was a scandal called the Barmat Scandal. The Barmat Scandal. And the Barmat were four brothers who started... They started basically a big food supply company, and they were bribing government officials so that they can get government deals for their food supply company. And I had to take notes on this because I'm not very good at remembering the details of financial crimes because they can be kind of confusing, kind of like reading about what George Soros did to the Bank of England. So the Barmat scandal took place from the end of World War I to about 1925. And I'm going to read to you guys some of my notes here. So first off, we have Gustaf Bower. Gustaf Bower was the Chancellor of Germany from 1919 to 1920. And he was a major receiver of kickbacks from the Barmat brothers. While he was Chancellor, he helped Julius Barmat. So Gustaf Bower, the Chancellor of Germany, from 1919 to 1920, he helped Julius Barmat get several food supply contracts with a number of German government departments. Barmat got an exorbitant amount of money from these deals, and Bower got a kickback. So the Chancellor of Germany was getting kickbacks from these Jewish businessmen. After leaving his position of Chancellor, he helped Barmat get a one-time scrap metal deal with the government. The media exposed that he had served on the board of one Barmat company, and he would deny getting any financial benefit, but this made him look absolutely terrible, considering the clear evidence against him. Then there was Friedrich Ebert. He was the president of the Weimar Republic from the end of World War I until his death in 1925. He had recommended that a visa be given to Julius Barmat for his many business trips to and from Germany because he was getting his food supply from the Netherlands. So he would go to the Netherlands, he would get the food supply in that country and then have it sent to Germany where he would make a lot of money with it. And so Friedrich Ebert, who was the president of the Weimar Republic from the end of World War I until his death in 1925, he made sure that Mr. Barmat got his visa so that he could make deals. And it turned out that Ebert had issued many letters of recommendation to Barmat bearing the presidential seal. And then you have probably the worst action, the worst part of the scandal, and that was that of the Postal Department in the Weimar Republic. The Postal Department was led by the Minister of Posts. His name was Anton Hofle. And in 1924, he received a bribe of 120,000 marks from the brothers Julius and Henry Barmat. And by this time, the mark had some value because it was tackled to the Rentenmark, which was a currency issued to stop the hyperinflation that plagued the Weimar Republic. In return for the bribe, the postal department loaned 14.5 million marks to the Barmat brothers. The brothers used that money for currency speculation, and they lost it all. What does that remind me of? As I was reading about this, it reminded me of George Soros. George Soros, he crashed the Bank of England by buying tons, billions of British pounds, and then immediately trading them off, selling them for German and American currencies. And then he just crashed the bank through currency speculation. And people look to George Soros and they say, well, you see, this is the evil of the Jews. People were doing the same damn thing before the rise of Hitler. They were saying, look at the Barmat brothers. Look at what they did with their currency speculation and making money off the starving German Volk. That's what they were saying. The German people were starving because of World War I, and this Jewish guy and his three brothers, they come from the Netherlands to Germany, and they make a bunch of deals with the politicians. They're bribing government officials. They're giving kickbacks to the Chancellor of Germany, all on the backs of the starving nation, the starving German folk. And this was one of the stories that the Nazis used to gain popularity. And the other scandal, this one's a lot simpler. This was the Scarc Scandal, and this was done also by Jewish brothers. This was Willie, Leo, and Max Sklodek. And the Sklodeks, they were arrested on the charge of swindling the Berlin City Bank by of about 10 million marks by means of faked invoices for goods never delivered. So they ran a clothing supply company, and they basically just did loan fraud, right? They did loan fraud. They did exactly what Shalom Rubashkin did years ago, back in the early 2000s. Shalom Rubashkin, he was running this big kosher meat plant, and he had a bunch of slaves from Central America. He enslaved a whole bunch of illegal immigrants from Central America. And then on top of that, he was doing loan fraud, and he was going to the banks and saying, oh, look how many people are buying my deli meat. Please give me money. And the banks gave him money, and he stole it. Yeah, and who commuted his sentencing? Donald Trump did. Yeah, so much for Donald Trump being a Hitler. Yeah, he was actually probably the most pro-Israel president that the U.S. has ever had. But Sklodek, the Scarc brothers, they were doing loan fraud, bank fraud, they finessed and swindled the Berlin City Bank, and they got millions of marks. And this was a pretty big scandal, and it was a story that the Nazis would use to make the Jews look evil and make the Nazis look like heroes for the German nation. So, with all this said, we can see how the Nazis looked to facts to justify their ideology. And this leads me to another observation that I made today. And I didn't make this observation today. I've been thinking about this for a long time now. But I was thinking about it today as I was reading all this stuff, because the Nazis, they pointed to the sins of individual Jews, and they said, look, this is why we have to exterminate the Jews. This is why we have to be in power, because the Jews are the enemy of Germany. They are the enemy of the Aryan people, of the Germanian race. So I was thinking about all this stuff, and it reminded me of Satan. See, people talk about the devil. They talk about Satan as if the devil is basically this eternal hippie who fell from heaven. He's just this eternal hippie who wants everyone to do immorality because he just loves immorality, and he hates judgment, and he hates order, and he hates all this. And this is I don't think this is the full picture, and I don't think this is a fully adequate view of things. I think I more so see the devil as an eternal Pharisee. The devil has his set of rules. He has his own moral system. He has a series of his own religious systems. He has his own priesthood. He has his own religion. And the devil, see, God hates immorality, but he's merciful because he understands that we're weak as human beings. The devil pushes us into immorality and then judges us and accuses us. So he tempts humanity. He wants humans to be sinful. He wants humans to be immoral so that he can judge and condemn and have a justification to condemn human beings for damnation and extermination. Now, I understand that the devil is a fallen angel, and I'm not promoting dualism. I'm not saying that the devil is like the counter God that's equal in power to God. No, I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is that because the devil is the leader of all the fallen angels and he wants to deceive mankind, the devil promotes his own religions to deceive us. He promotes his own systems of religion and spirituality. And that's why when you read occult books, they're very complicated and they have all these symbols and icons and all these rituals. Why? Because this is a part of the religion of the devil. He has his own religion. He has his own set of rituals. He has his own priesthood. And when we sin as human beings, or when human beings do bad things and do evil things, the devil sets up his own tribunal on earth. If you look at the Nazis, the communists, the French Revolution, these were all people of the devil. These were all entities and acolytes of Satan. And they had their own tribunals, and they had their own set of morals. And for those who were transgressors, for those who transgressed against these systems of morality, they were killed. They had no mercy. They were put under judgment, extreme judgment, not the mercy of God, but the judgment and the mercilessness of Satan. And so the devil has his own tribunal. And the Nazis were one of the acolytes. They were one of the Nazis were, the Nazi Empire, the Third Reich, set up the devil's tribunal, is what I want to say. And so they pointed to the sins of some Jews to then justify the Holocaust and say, okay, now we have to impose judgment on all these people, all the Jewish people, and not just the Jewish people, but the Polish people and others, and we have to exterminate them because they have individuals in their midst who are bad. And so now we're going to set up this tribunal of moral judgment, and the moral judgment has no mercy whatsoever. It is the judgment of the Pharisees. It is the judgment of the mob that screamed, "Crucify him," when they were before Pontius Pilate. That is what we're dealing with here. That is the tribunal of the devil. It's the tribunal of the devil. The devil, he looks to people's immorality and he says, you see, that's what these people are doing. They deserve absolute judgment. They deserve despotic judgment and imposition, and they need to be exterminated. And so you have the laws of God, but at the same time we have the mercy of God. And God has his laws, but he's not merciless. He has mercy. He has understanding. He's our Father. He is fatherly. And you have the Virgin Mary, who's motherly. But you have the devil, and the devil judges. Not saying that he judges in the sense that he is God, the judge, but he judges us nonetheless, just like people on earth will judge each other. He judges us. Not with the authority of God, obviously not, but he still judges us. And he wants to incriminate us, and he wants to put us under a tyrannical tribunal. And when the devil manipulates enough people and influences enough people, he eventually establishes his own tribunal. The Nazis were one of the entities that held a satanic tribunal. And you can see in Nazism this sacramental system. Like I said, the devil has his own religious system. And there were all these different events that the Nazis had before they took power in which they were fighting communists or they were fighting the government. And there was one case where a group of Nazis were fighting against the state. I think this was during the Hitler's attempted coup, and a number of Nazis were killed. And supposedly, this is one of the stories that the Nazis would like to recount, and this was part of their mythology. Supposedly, there was a German who was holding aloft the Nazi flag, and some of the Nazis were shot, and then blood splattered onto the flag. And this was during, I'm pretty certain it was during an attempted coup. That flag became a relic for the Nazis because it had the blood of a Nazi martyr. And the Germans, before the Nazis took power, they would have these events, they would have these festivals where they would take that flag that had the blood of a Nazi martyr on it, and then they would take other Nazi flags, and they would have those Nazi flags touch the blood on that flag. And they believed, and they would teach, that by having those flags touch the blood that was splattered on that flag, that those flags would be blessed by the blood of a martyr. So they had their own system of martyrdom. They had their own sacramentalism, where the blood of the martyrs was seen as in a sacramental way. And it was a religion. It was a cult. And this is why I say that the devil creates his own religions. He creates his own cults. He creates his own system of morality. And it's a system of morality where there is no mercy. And that's why demonic ideologies lead to so much bloodshed. That's why communism, the French Revolution, Genghis Khan, the Nazis, that's why they led to so much bloodshed, because these were the acolytes of Satan. And if you are an acolyte of Satan, then you are holding the tribunal of the devil. You are imposing the tribunal of the devil, which is absolutely and utterly merciless. And that's what the devil leads humanity to. And the devil wants us to go back to the very systems that he invented. And that's what's happening right now. Human beings, because we work in cycles all the time, we have a utopian vision, we start an ideology, we do massacres, we do wars, and then human beings say, let's not do that again, and then we go back to doing it again. And that's what's happening. That's what's happening. We are working in cycles. And it just goes back to that verse in the Old Testament where Solomon says, there is nothing new under the sun. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.